Good evening, everyone. I am Tabitha Watchin, the Social Emotional Learning Facilitator for the East Providence School District. Pleased to introduce to you tonight Dr. Ellen Flannery Schroeder, Professor and Director of the Child Psychology Program at URI. She's here this evening to talk with us about recognizing anxiety and depression in your child or adolescent, and she will offer some tips on how to support your child or adolescent who may be dealing with either or both. So thank you, Dr. Ellen Flannery Schroeder, for being here tonight. I'm super excited to have you.
Thank you, Tabitha. I'm honored to be here, super excited to talk with everybody tonight. Thanks for all of you who are attending. I recognize this is somewhat of a difficult time to be attending a Zoom talk, but I'll try to make it worth your while. I do also want to say, Tabitha, is there a chat that's available?
Yes, there is. There's a chat available, and I'll monitor that as we go along.
Okay, great. That would be great because I can't see the chat on my view, but I do want to welcome participants to ask questions at any time because I find that it makes the talk more useful to folks when you can ask a question at a pertinent moment, and it also just makes it inherently more interesting. So feel free to ask questions. You can do so in the chat. Tabitha will give me the heads up, and I'm happy to answer them as we go. All right, so we'll get started. Parenting in a pandemic, recognizing anxiety and depression in your child and adolescent. This always happens as I get started. Not quite sure why my clicker's not working. Hang on a sec. Was working on the test drive. All right, we'll do it manually. Strange. Okay, not sure what happened there. My apologies. Hopefully I'll be able to click forward. As you may know, this is the first talk in a 4-part series. I'm super excited. I've never done a parenting series before. I've given lots of talks to parents. But really, there's a lot of information, and parents take that information and they really want to put it into practice, and they do, but how wonderful for us to be able to come back together, learn a new skill, reflect on the past skill that you've been trying out. So I'm super excited and very grateful to the folks who put this parenting series together. All right, so let me talk a little bit about what I'm going to cover today. We're going to talk about how to understand pandemic problems. When I was reviewing for this, I thought, man, that is a tall order. So let me just say we are going to take a peek at pandemic problems because I don't think we are going to fully understand any pandemic problems for a very long time. I don't think we're fully going to understand the impact of this event for years to come. So we will not be figuring it all out tonight, but we will take a look at the pandemic briefly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I do really want to underscore its effects on our kids. Then we're going to turn to the importance of building strong affective skills. And if you're not sure what that means, stay tuned because I'll talk a lot more about that. We're going to talk about how to talk to your children about mental health, how to recognize problems, and how to respond with care. Now my clicker's working. I'm not sure what was going on. So here's where we're going to turn and just take a peek at what COVID has sort of rolled out for us and what we've been dealing with since its onset. I'm not going to cover each of these, but just take a few moments, let your eyes glance across the screen and really appreciate the many, many ways that COVID has impacted us. Of course, this is a list of 15 largely negative impacts, but just because I'm a psychologist and I like to train people to do this, I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that COVID has brought some good things as well, in that it's changed our perspective for the better in some ways. Maybe it was, I had a child at home with a gap year. That was a big plus for me. I got him for an extra year before he went off to college. I'm sure many of you can point to some good things that happened because of or despite COVID. But here we're really kind of focusing on the negative impacts. So lots of worries about health and safety, difficulties with learning and what is going to be the educational impact. Our routines have been disrupted. They're largely not back to normal even now. We have seen all kinds of inequities surface, from food and educational inequities. We've seen parent burnout, student burnout. We're all zoomed out. So we're really dealing with a lot. And your children, you as parents and your children are dealing with a significant, the weight of COVID is very heavy. And I'm not the only one to tell you that. I mean, you know it in your personal experience. You know what COVID has done to you and to your family and the extra burden that it has applied. And we have some research that's rolling out, which is going to prove you right. So you're going to say, yes, I've been more stressed and my child is more stressed, and the research is bearing that out. You know, I've got here 4 studies. This is just like scratching the surface of the research that's beginning to emerge on the impact of the pandemic. But we can pretty clearly see that teens, young adults, and children are really negatively impacted in a variety of ways. More anxiety, more depression, impacts on their academic trajectory or academic learning, their education, more social isolation. Overall, the picture is not particularly good when it comes to mental health. And that's, you know, COVID definitely put a spotlight on mental health, and, you know, the mental health problems that are emerging from it are certainly a negative, but the spotlight, at least from where I sit, is a positive. So finally, we're getting increased attention to mental health issues. And I mean, here we are talking about it. So I'm excited for that. I'm going to stop talking about COVID now and talk about the ways in which, very generally, we can support and nurture our children and adolescents through difficult times. One of the things that is so crucially important for child, and when I say child, I mean child and adolescent, but child's mental health and well-being. So, and that is affective education. So what is affective education? It's the ability to recognize emotion in yourself, in others. It's being able to look at someone's face or body and recognize the emotion that they're feeling. It's being able to recognize an emotion within yourself, being able to accurately name that emotion. So as we're sort of preparing our kids or raising our children, we know, because we're told, that before our kids go to school, we need to teach them certain things. We need to teach them their colors and their letters. But nobody says, yeah, and don't forget to teach them their emotions. It's critically important. If you can't read emotions in others, you have impaired interpersonal relationships. And those interpersonal relationships are critical in terms of buffering the challenges that life inevitably throws at us. So hone those skills in your children, no matter how old they are. We really want to help them to be able to identify emotions in themselves, to recognize the vast number of emotions that they might experience, and to appropriately label them, and to be able to recognize them in others. I once saw a child, and I took a picture of it. I wanted to put it on the slide, but I couldn't find it. But it was a child who was about 5 years old with a t-shirt on, and the t-shirt said, "I speak emoji." And the reality is, there is some research that suggests that children are better at reading and identifying emotions in emoji than they are in human faces. So just stop and think about that for a moment. I those of you who've seen me talk before know that I have my youngest child is 16, and before every single talk I do, I make her sit next to me and I run through the entire talk with her, largely because I'm talking about how to help kids her age, and she gives me some really important insights. And she, weeds out my bad mom jokes and stuff like that. But when I got to this and I was talking about that research about kids being able to recognize emotions in emoji better than in human faces, she said to me, and now we're all wearing masks. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a critically important observation. So, older kids, maybe not so problematic because they've lived the majority of their childhood without masks. But for our youngest kids who are growing up with masked faces, they're going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to that affective education and when it comes to being able to read emotions, particularly in others. So for those of you who have young children at home, who are, masked, probably not at home, thankfully, but out in the world, just keep, and even if they're not masked, just remember that sort of emotional education, labeling emotions and being clear about what emotions you're experiencing and others are experiencing, such a critical life skill. Name them to tame them. There is growing research that suggests that when you accurately, or when you can identify an emotion that you're experiencing, the intensity of that emotion is decreased. So if I'm really frustrated and I name it and I recognize that I'm feeling frustrated, I will feel ever so slightly less frustrated. And sometimes we'll take all we can get. So another important reason to do some really good affective education with your kids. And then you also want to help them understand the fundamental connection between the way that they feel, their emotion, and the way that they think and the way that they behave. So I'm going to put up a little graphic, which is commonly known as the cognitive triangle. If you're familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, you have probably seen this triangle before. But really, it's a representation of the relationship between the way we think, the way we behave, and the way that we feel. And the general idea, I pulled this graphic from online, and really it would be far better if each of the lines connecting those circles had double arrows, because the idea is that if you change any one of the points of this triangle, you change the other two. So if we're experiencing a big emotion, anxiety, let's say, and we want to reduce that anxiety, one of the ways that we can do it is by changing our thoughts or changing our behavior. If we happen to change our behavior in a particular way, we'll also notice that our thoughts and our emotions will also be affected. So helping kids to understand the connection, super, super helpful, because it helps, sorry, there's like a spider. It's super helpful to help kids manage emotion or manage their thinking or manage their behavior. When you understand the interconnectedness, you gain some power on being able to change the element that you wish to change. All right, so a checkup from the neck up. I say this playfully, but I really hope that parents will, if they haven't already, will begin to engage kids, their children, in conversations about mental health. If you have young kids at home, start early. If you have older kids at home, start now, and talk about mental and behavioral health all the time. It sends some really important messages to kids that you care about their well-being, that you care about their mental health, that there's no topic that they can't talk about. So if they're feeling emotionally distraught, they know that they can talk with you about it. Now, I've had a lot of parents, I give this advice a lot, and I have a lot of parents like, yeah, I ask about it and I get nothing, crickets, I get the cold shoulder, I get nothing. And I would say, keep trying, do not give up, because not giving up gives the message that I really care and I'm not going to give up. So I'm going to keep asking, which might eventually break down the defenses, and you might get a more talkative child. But if you can't do that, I have known parents and kids who, for whatever reason, weren't able to talk very directly. So they would use a notebook. So the child would write, how they were feeling, something personal or distressing. They would write it in a notebook because they weren't able to go to their parent and talk face to face. And then they'd leave the notebook in the designated spot, and the parent would read the notebook and be able to comment back to the child using the notebook. It's not a great place to end up, but it might be a good place to start. Alternatively, talk about mental health, watch a movie together that's about a mental health topic, or even that isn't, but be able to talk about the characters and how they might be feeling or how they're solving, difficult issues, or read a book together, do sort of a parent-child book club if your child likes reading. But it doesn't even matter if it's a movie, it doesn't matter if it's a book, but share some stimulus and react together about it. I also have on here, use a code phrase. And by that, sometimes it's hard for kids who are experiencing mental health difficulties to come to their parents and say, I'm having a mental health difficulty. I need help. I need your help. I need to talk about this, especially if kids and parents haven't been having those conversations all along. And so you might be able to work with your child to come up with a code phrase, a phrase that would never be used for any other purpose, but to alert the parent that the child needs some extra support. So I had a friend who had a code phrase with her parents, and actually it was a code phrase for a different reason. It was the phrase that she would use if she was out at a party and something bad was going on and she needed to be picked up immediately, and she didn't want to say, look, something bad is going down here, I want to get out. You need to come and get me immediately. But the code phrase was something she would ordinarily never say. It was, Mom, I lost one of your pearl earrings. So you can use any kind of code phrase. It just has to be one that you wouldn't ordinarily use in regular circumstances. And so if you have a child who's having a difficult time, if they say, hey, I lost the pearl earring, then you as a parent know they're experiencing some psychological distress, and you can take some extra time, care, concern, and begin the conversation about that. Another way, if you can't talk directly to your child about mental health, it's important that you show your child how you feel about conversations surrounding mental health. And you can do that by showing support for other people. So talk about your child's friends and their mental health, or your relatives, or how you're caring for your own mental health. Because in those showings of support, your child can see how you regard and how you prioritize mental health, which is absolutely the message we want to give kids. Now, I see that there's a message in the chat, but I can't see what it is, so I'm going to stop talking for a moment.
Yes, I was just going to pause you, actually. So good timing. We have a panel, an attendee who says that she has seen you speak before, and now she does this checking in with her twin 12-year-old girls all the time. So she thanks you.
Oh, awesome. That is the best news ever. Wonderful. Yeah. And keep it up. It gets so much easier. And I'm thrilled to hear that somebody could start at 12 and go, rolling with it. All right. So, what do you say? You want to have these conversations with your child about difficult mental health topics. Again, if you've been doing it from the start, it's easy. Your child thinks nothing of it. I mean, I'm a psychologist mom, so I say to my daughter, all right, check up from the neck up. How you doing? And, she thinks nothing of that, and then just reports out on how her mental health is. But I don't want to say that it's that easy, because I know, there are plenty of kids who vary in their talkativeness or how much sort of internal life they disclose to a parent. So I don't want to make it sound like it's so super easy. But I do want to make this talk really practical. So what do you say? What are some of the things that you can say? So I have a few listed here. I'm here if you want to talk. That's a great, super non-threatening, come to me. I'm going to leave the ball in your court. I want you to know that I'm open and I am receptive and I will listen if you come to talk to me. And then if they do come to talk, you should be darn sure that you listen up. How are you really? You know, we were a few months into the pandemic, and I said to all three of my kids, you know, people are really suffering with the social isolation and all of those negative effects that I posted in an earlier slide. You know, everybody's really struggling. How are you? And I don't mean, how are you? I'm fine. Okay, great, move on. I really mean it. How are you really? And so, you know, making sure that we don't sort of stop at the how are you? I'm fine. How was your day? Good. Don't end there. It's not enough. Tell me how you feel about, it could be anything. It could be a movie you watched. It could be a happening in your family. It could be a happening in the world. But I like that sentence stem because it shows that I care about what you're thinking. I care about what goes on in your head. I might learn from you and what goes on in your head. So talk to me, share it with me. Or I remember a time when, you have to be a little bit careful with this one. But I remember a time when is designed to then you end that sentence with, I felt frustrated like you're feeling now. Or I remember this time I had this tremendous struggle and here are the number of things I tried and here's how I failed and here's how ultimately I was able to overcome that challenge. And so what message is sent to your child that I hear you, I understand, I know what you're feeling like. I've been there too. It sort of forges a little bit of a connection. So you want to be careful not to sort of one up them or present it in a way that says, yeah, I felt that too. Like, come on, I got over it. That's not what we're aiming for. Or when you're feeling this way, what usually helps? Super important question to help hone a child's problem-solving skills. So to be able to sort of reflect back on past times they have been able to manage some distress or discomfort, and then being able to use those things, the strategies that work moving forward, really hones a very important life skill, problem solving. And if we could fix one thing today that would make the biggest difference, what would it be? Again, that's, I really care about your distress. I want to help you. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to, but let's sort of nail down what is the biggest problem here. So you're getting problem definition, you're getting a little bit of problem solving there, and a lot of understanding and care and concern about your child's distress. That's what's being conveyed. And then I don't want to neglect the fact, so we just went over some questions that parents can use to talk with kids. I have here on this slide actually a workbook page from a child therapy workbook that we use at the Child Anxiety Program. And it's really designed to help kids to come up with the ways that they can talk about mental health issues with their parents. So again, I designed this workbook. I'm super excited about it. I took a sabbatical in the spring, and this is what I worked on, and we're rolling it out in the Child Anxiety Program this fall. But you can see that I really value these conversations about mental health issues. So I just want to really underscore the fact that it's not just parents who need to initiate these conversations. We also need to teach kids to initiate those conversations as well. And then we need to be receptive listeners. All right, so now we're going to transition to recognizing mental health difficulties in children, but I'm going to sort of go over how these things present in youth, but the reality is they present very similarly in adolescents and adults as well. So we're going to start with anxiety. Those of you who know me know this is sort of my passion, my expertise. All of my clinical work and my research is in anxiety disorders. And it also is the #1 mental health problem. So very high prevalence, around 12 to 20% of all children are likely to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder or are currently diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. So those are pretty big numbers. That means in an average classroom, around 3 to 5 kids are going to have an anxiety disorder. It is also true that anxiety is genetic. It's also true that it's learned, but certainly it runs in families. Runs in families because it's genetic, runs in families because kids are learning how to cope with the world from their parents. So parents are modeling a particular style of coping, which tends to be an avoidant one. If you're anxious about something, you avoid it, which is not a great strategy. It's also common to have more than one anxiety disorder. So we see a lot of kids in the child anxiety program and other anxiety treatment clinics. And it's almost a rare case for a child to come in with one single anxiety disorder. And we're going to talk about the whole spectrum of different anxiety disorders in a moment. I also want to note that anxiety certainly co-occurs with other anxiety disorders, but it also can occur in combination with other disorders, especially depression, but lots of other. I mean, you can have anxiety and autism, anxiety and ADHD. You can have all kinds of combinations of disorders. I will say, though, that anxiety and depression are best friends. They really tend to co-occur. And again, I see there are some comments, so I'm going to stop.
The question was just, someone asked if the slides could be shared so that they could go back and review later. I did mention that we're recording this session and they'll be able to access the video.
Excellent.
Is that acceptable to you?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we're going to talk about anxiety disorders and how to recognize them. Anxiety is sort of a big global concept, and there are lots of, it's sort of a category of disorders, and there's lots of specific disorders within it. I have a list here, and we're going to go through these 6 anxiety disorders. There are other anxiety disorders, and in fact, that last one, obsessive compulsive disorder, is no longer actually categorized as an anxiety disorder. It's now under a category called obsessive compulsive disorder, but it used to be considered an anxiety disorder. And in my head, it's it very much sort of fits and operates like an anxiety disorder. In any event, we're going to go through all of these. I do want to say at the outset that the first 3, separation anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and social anxiety disorder, are known as the big 3. They're known as the big 3 because they are the 3 most frequently occurring anxiety disorders. Now, I will say that specific phobia is tremendously common. In fact, it is so common, we don't even consider it in the big 3, even though it really should be #1. In terms, if we look at prevalence, it's the most commonly occurring, but it is so common, we kind of don't even consider it. All right, but we're going to talk about each of these in turn. So we'll start with separation anxiety disorder. The heart of separation anxiety is that the child or adolescent is fearful about being separated from a loved one, often a parent, but doesn't need to be a parent, because they worry that something will happen in the big bad world to either the child or to the loved one to prevent them from being able to be reunited in the future. So the child might worry they're going to be kidnapped or killed and they won't be able to reunite with the parent. Or alternatively, they might worry that something bad is going to happen to the parent. The parent's going to be in a car accident and then they're not going to be able to be reunited. I will also say separation anxiety disorder used to be a childhood anxiety disorder, but in the most recent version of the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, it is now able to be applied to adults. So adults can now have separation anxiety disorder as well. What do you see? So let's just stop for a moment and think about what a separation anxiety or a child who's suffering from separation anxiety disorder might look like. You know, this is a child who is going to have some reluctance upon separating from their loved one. So these are kids who have difficulty sleeping alone in their bedroom, have difficulty staying at home alone at night, provided that they're old enough to stay home alone. These are kids who might have difficulty being in their room alone or being on a separate floor of the house. So if everybody's downstairs, a child with separation anxiety disorder might have a difficult time, being upstairs if they're alone. These are the kids who also make a lot of trips to the nurse. So why do they go to the nurse? Not necessarily because they're sick, though they might have stomach aches and headaches due to anxiety, but largely because the nurse is going to call their parent and they're going to be reassured that their parent is okay at home. Now we'll move on to generalized anxiety disorder. I sometimes joke, not to say that generalized anxiety disorder or GAD, not to say that GAD is a funny disorder, but I sometimes joke that I can diagnose the disorder with one question. If I could see the chat, I'd invite you all to guess that question, but since I can't really see the chat, it's okay. I'm not going to ask you, but think about it for a moment. So generalized anxiety disorder, here's how I can diagnose it, almost, not quite, with one question. I could ask a parent, is your child a worry wart? And if they're like, oh my gosh, totally, yes, you know my child, have you met them? Then I'm going to start thinking, maybe we have a child with GAD. So what does this look like in practice? These are the kids who are worrying constantly. They're worrying about a wide variety of things. So they're worrying about their pet's health. They're worrying about their soccer practice. They're worried about their parent picking them up on time. You name it, they're kind of worrying across the board, and they have a hard time stopping the worry. So they might desire to stop worrying because worrying is really no fun. It can cause all kinds of physical problems. So kids with GAD often present with a lot of physical problems, headaches, stomach aches, muscle tension, diarrhea, nausea, all pretty common with GAD. It's unpleasant, and they can't stop. So they want to stop, but they're having a difficult time. Maybe they can stop thinking about their worries for a short period of time, but then those worries creep back in. These are the kids who also tend to be perfectionistic. They want something just so. Having something just so helps to reduce their anxiety. Doesn't ever really stop the worry. Now, I do want to say that we have a lot of really legitimate reasons as humans, involved in our lives. We have a lot of reasons to worry legitimately, and legitimate worry would not be considered a disorder. So if a child is, very concerned about a parent who, has a significant medical diagnosis, we would never say that worry, even if they were worrying a good deal of time, we would never say that they had generalized anxiety disorder, because that worry would be warranted given the situation. So just to lighten up things, here's the Worrier Pose. Am I doing this right? Is everybody looking at me? Am I doing anything right? What's my life's purpose? Do my boobs look weird in this top? Should I get chips for dinner? All right, and let's move on to social anxiety. So a lot of people mistakenly believe that kids with social anxiety are kids who don't have good social skills. And because they don't have good social skills, they sort of worry about how they're going to come off in social situations. Not necessarily. So the reality is that there are well-skilled, very highly socially skilled kids, and kids who are less socially skilled. And it doesn't matter. They can both have social anxiety disorder. The heart of social anxiety disorder is a worry that other people who are observing me will negatively critique me. So they will negatively judge the way I talked or the way that I answered that question. And then I will feel embarrassed or humiliated. So that's really the heart of social anxiety, worry that I will be negatively evaluated. Social anxiety can either be very specific. So some specific kinds of social anxiety are giving presentations, or like this one, or let's see, ordering food in a restaurant, or using a public bathroom. Using the public bathroom, not because it might be dirty or germy, but because you might be overheard while you're using the toilet, and others will, ew, oh, yuck, or you might be smelled, and other people, and that would be embarrassing. Or social anxiety can be generalized, which means across a wide variety of social situations, there's this really pretty significant worry about how they will be regarded, and being regarded negatively. Now, I want to say that a little bit of social anxiety is absolutely developmentally normal. And so we're really talking with all of these disorders, a little bit of anxiety is definitely a normal thing. We all experience it on a daily basis, multiple times a day. We have little sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, little bouts of anxiety. But we're really talking about anxiety that is more significant, more intense here when we're talking about social anxiety, because lots of teens have social concerns, and we're not going to call them all socially anxious. Now let's talk about specific phobia. My apologies to those who have specific phobias of spiders, but if you were sort of snoozing in the middle, this slide was sure to wake you up. So let's talk a little bit about specific phobia. It is an intense fear of a specific object, event, or a situation. So it could be that someone has an intense fear of spiders or snakes or airplanes or clowns. And there's sort of tremendous fear that's generated in the presence of that object or situation or event. And so what does the person do? Well, they avoid it, because if I avoid being in the presence of spiders, I can keep my fear level down. So what happens when I'm confronted with a spider? Well, I might panic, freeze, cry, run away, any of those things. So just to reiterate something that I said earlier, this is an incredibly common phenomenon. There's tons of people with specific phobias of one sort or another. And I want to talk a little bit with panic disorder, because I think panic disorder is misunderstood by many. So lots of families come in describing what their child has as panic disorder. Noting either rightly or wrongly that their child is experiencing panic attacks. So a panic attack is very quick to begin, a fast onset episode of extreme anxiety. And when I say fast onset, I mean within 10 minutes. So it's not a slow build. Anybody who has slow build to high intensity, that is not a panic attack. Panic attack is a very quick build to intense anxiety with a number of sort of symptoms and features, which I'm not necessarily going to go into right now. But a lot of times people there's two kinds of panic attacks. And this is where people, I think, get a little mixed up about panic disorder. There are panic attacks that are called cued, meaning you are getting the panic attack because you're in the presence of something that is scaring the wits out of you. So a spider, for example, can elicit a panic attack if I'm afraid of spiders. That's cued. It is cued by the spider. There's also panic attacks that are uncued, meaning there's nothing scary around. I don't see a spider. I'm not afraid about doing a presentation. I'm not worried about something that's coming up. But all of a sudden, out of the blue, I have this rapid onset to highly intense anxiety episode. That is an uncued panic attack, comes out of the blue. And those are the panic attacks that qualify one for panic disorder, not the cued kind. So if your child knows why they're having a panic attack, it's not going to lead them to have panic disorder. They're going to have legit panic attacks. That's possible, but we're not going to call it panic disorder. So in individuals who have these out of the blue, uncued panic attacks, you can imagine the worry. You don't know where it's going to happen. And so maybe you were in the grocery store and you had a panic attack, it came out of the blue, you weren't expecting it, and you might have a second thought about going back to the grocery store, or at least the one where you had the panic attack. And then maybe you have a panic attack while you're in the car, and then you're like, was it something about the car that provoked that panic attack? Because it seemed to come out of the blue. And so you might start avoiding places. Now, I don't want to go to the grocery store, or at least that grocery store, or maybe any grocery store, and I don't want to drive or be in a car because I might have a panic attack. And so what you often see is sort of a shrinking of the place that the individual is able to go, or to state it in the opposite, a greater avoidance of places, because the child or adolescent is afraid of having a panic attack in that place. All right, and then let's turn to obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. So obsessive compulsive disorder, I think, is best understood by recognizing that there are obsessions, and I'll define that in a minute, and compulsions. Those are sort of two things that comprise this disorder. So the obsessions are thoughts that come back over and over in our head. They don't make a lot of sense, and they create tremendous anxiety. So an example of an obsessive thought might be that my hands have germs on them. And so that thought comes to me and it's incredibly distressing. I have the thought, my anxiety goes through the roof. And then the compulsive part of it is a behavior that's engaged in an attempt to reduce the anxiety that's caused by that obsessive thought. So in this particular case, I might wash my hands. That might be my compulsive behavior to reduce that anxiety that was brought on by the thought that my hands have germs or dirt on them. And that compulsive behavior is really very effective. It works incredibly well to reduce the anxiety that was brought on by the thought. So I have a thought, anxiety super high, engage in the compulsive behavior, boom, anxiety reduced, works like a charm. So what do I do the next time I have that obsessive thought, my anxiety is high? I'm going to engage in that compulsive behavior because it is so gosh darn effective. But not for long. It only gives me short-term relief before my anxiety is going to go up again, which is why you see with OCD that sort of cyclical pattern of somebody engaging in the obsessive thought and the repeated compulsive behaviors. All right, now we're going to turn our attention to depression, and I hope all of you who need them have your readers on, because I apologize, the font is a little bit small on this slide. But I'm going to walk through some of the most notable signs of depression, so that, I mean, that's the whole point here, so you can be on the lookout for them. So the feeling of sadness, we certainly identify feeling sad as often contributing to this experience of depression. I want to also introduce, though, that sometimes sadness doesn't have to be in play for depression to be occurring. So sometimes someone can have significant irritability in the absence of sadness and still qualify for a depressive diagnosis. Loss of interest in activity. So individuals who are depressed often, though not always, will report something called anhedonia. Anhedonia is a loss of interest or pleasure in things that you previously enjoyed. So if your child used to love family game night and now they no longer do, or they loved soccer and now they just have no interest in playing the game. I mean, it could be that they're just getting old and their interests are changing, but it also could be a sign of depression. And certainly I would count it towards a sign of depression if it was co-occurring with other possible signs of depression. So other signs of depression include difficulty sleeping, which could look like any of the following. No problem falling asleep, but then waking up early, maybe 4 a.m. or way earlier than you need to be able or need to get up, and having difficulty sort of falling back to sleep. Or it could be that you can't fall asleep. You have sort of insomnia as you lay down to bed, you're tossing and turning, can't go to sleep. Or alternatively, fall asleep right away, wake up in the middle of the night. Or it could be oversleeping, any kind of sleep difficulty can qualify as a symptom of depression. Similarly, any kind of appetite disturbance, so eating more or eating less, will both count as a symptom towards depression. Individuals who are depressed sometimes show psychomotor retardation, which is a slowness in moving, or they express extreme fatigue or loss of energy. Individuals who are very significantly depressed, sometimes you see a real lethargy, so difficulty not only in getting out of bed, but even doing sort of simple tasks like getting dressed. Takes a very long time. They might also have some difficulty with decision making, so they can't decide what to wear. So because I couldn't decide what to wear, I just didn't make the decision at all, didn't get dressed for the day. Also, recurrent thoughts of death or suicide, certainly a red flag for depression and something that you always want to pay attention to. You know, some very brief, occasional thoughts of, you know, dying or suicide in this sort of abstract, general thinking of other people sense is not uncommon. What makes it very concerning is if an individual is having a thought of death or suicide that keeps coming back over and over again. Any thoughts of their own suicide certainly would be concerning, but those repetitive and prolonged thoughts are ones that we are super concerned about. So we're concerned about all kinds of thoughts of death or suicide, but most significantly concerned if the thought keeps coming back, and when it does come back, I stay in the thought for a very long time. So I think about it multiple times, and when I'm in it, I'm stuck in it and I can't get out. And then I also wanted to touch base on substance use. I know that that really sort of wasn't in the description, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But the reality is that anxiety and depression compete for the #1 sort of mental health disorder. I'm going to say anxiety is the winner. I mean, if one could have a winner with anxiety, I'm going to say that anxiety is the #1 issue and depression is the -- 2. If you talk to a depression researcher, they might flip those around. The reality is they're both huge problems. So who cares which one's in first or second place? But reliably in third place is substance use. And we do know from research on the pandemic that substance use has increased, along with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, substance use. These have all increased. So I thought that it was really worth taking a few minutes to talk about what are the physical changes that you might see in a child who's using substances. What are the things to look out for? In terms of physical changes, look at their eyes. You know, my mom, when I would come home when I was a teenager and I'd go out with my friends, I could not go to bed before I hugged her and looked right in her eyes. So the hug always involved a sniff as well. It was a look in the eye and a sniff to see if she could smell anything on my clothing. Not a bad idea. So anyway, you want to look at eyes, pinpoint or enlarged pupils, often a sign of some kind of drug use. Appetite or sleeping pattern changes, weight loss or weight gain, deterioration of personal grooming habits, shakiness, trembling, slurred speech. You can see that some of these physical changes overlap with depression, which makes sometimes weeding these out kind of difficult. And so as parents, don't do it on your own. You know, seek help from a professional. If you have concerns about the potential for substance use and or depression and or anxiety, and you can't quite figure it out, you know something's up, your spidey senses are tingling, you know, it's even hard for professionals to weed that out. So don't do it alone. In terms of behavioral changes, cutting classes, grades on the decline, no longer participating in extracurricular activities. And again, that sort of overlaps with depression again. You know, are you not participating because you're doing something else that's more desirable? You're hanging out with a new crowd and you're doing drugs with a new crowd? Or is it the anhedonia that's really more of a symptom of depression? So it's just not fun anymore. Any complaints from teachers, coaches, classmates, all should be taken very seriously. theft of money or valuables, constantly borrowing money, a lot of isolation. I mean, teens tend to isolate. So again, there's a normative level and there's a non-normative level. And again, isolation in combination with some of these other signs and symptoms, should be red flags. Any kind of change in relationships, friends, favorite hangouts. If your child is doing different things, investigate a little bit further. Don't chalk it up to, growth and development of your child. Inquire, check it out. And, we get the question a lot, how do I know if I need to go to a professional, or, how do I know if it's really a problem? Everybody's anxious. Everybody experiences depression. I mean, it's the stuff of life. Anxiety and depression are two, let me reword that. Yeah, anxiety and sadness. Let me not say depression. Anxiety and sadness are critical. It's the stuff of life. We can't avoid them. And excuse me, hang on for a second. I would argue that we don't ever want to get rid of all of our anxiety or all of our sadness, because to have anxiety helps us to know bravery and courage, and to have sadness helps us to better know joy, right? There is no joy if we don't have the contrasting emotion of sadness. So a little bit normal, but when do we need to be concerned? When is it too much? When do we have too much anxiety, or when do we have too much sadness? And so a lot of people will talk about the 4 Ds. Is the anxiety, I'm going to just use the case of anxiety for ease here, but you could substitute depression or other mental health problem. Is the anxiety disproportionate? So we're all a little bit nervous before we come in front of a crowd and give a talk. So we would expect some anxiety, but is it debilitating anxiety? Is it out of proportion to the event? If so, that's going to be sort of something to note. Is the anxiety causing disruption in the child's ability to function? So am I so nervous that I can't go to school? Am I so nervous that I can't perform well on tests? Or I can't manage to get my homework done because or I can't sleep well at night? Is my sleep disrupted because I'm laying in bed and worrying? Is the child experiencing severe distress? So again, I already talked about how some of those negative emotions, like anxiety and sadness, are expected, even potentially desirable in one's life in small degrees, for reasons I said earlier, because they make the contrasting emotion even more wonderful. Sadness makes joy more wonderful. But we certainly don't want the anxiety or the depression to be severe. And is the symptom duration prolonged? So we're all going to get sad, we're all going to get anxious for short periods of time. But if it's really extending and it's a long, protracted period of feeling that negative emotion, we're concerned. So if you see these 4 Ds, consider referral to a professional. All right, and I want to talk about how to respond with care. So if your child is coming to you with concerns about their well-being, or if you're initiating those conversations, you want to be sure that you are validating the experience that your child brings to you. So that sounds really difficult. That's a wonderful validating statement when your child is coming to you and expressing some kind of dysphoric or uncomfortable emotion. And then you want to appreciate the fact that they came to you and talked about it. We really want to reward that. So you could say something like, it took a lot of courage to tell me that, and I really appreciate that you did it. And then sometimes we're going to need to refer. You don't have to handle that alone. And even if you're not referring to a professional, maybe you're referring it to yourself, and you say, hey, I'm going to be a member of your team too, and you're not going to handle that alone. We're going to face this difficult challenge together. And when you do those sort of 3 things, you are really significantly helping to promote your child or your adolescent's well-being. Validate, appreciate, and refer. And then my daughter is Peach Schroeder. And I told you I run every talk past her. And when I got to that last slide, she said to me, yeah, Mom, sometimes you just want someone to say, you're right, that sucks. I understand why you're upset about that. And I said, do you mind if I put that quote in? That's perfect. And she said, no, I don't mind. I don't know any of those people, so it's okay. You can use my quote. But she taught me a really important lesson. This isn't the first time we've talked about this issue. Several years ago, I'm a psychologist mom, you know, and I jump in to solve my children's problems for better or worse. I know I shouldn't, but I, like all of you, want to remove distress from my child's life. And so she was complaining about something and I jumped in to try to solve it. And she gave me this line, you know, Mom, sometimes I don't want you to solve my problem. I just want you to hear me. So I wanted to really end on that note because I think it's a really, really important point. And just that alone may feel to a parent like you're doing nothing, but may feel incredibly validating and accepting and appreciated by your child. So I'm going to stop here because Tabitha's back on and maybe there's some questions in the chat.
Yes. So Dawn asks, is anger at home but not really other symptoms a common concern for anxiety, or is this just a normal part of pre-puberty or COVID? So anger at home.
Yeah, anger at home. It's really difficult to say without knowing more information, but let me say this. If there's no anger outside of the home and the anger is limited to you as parents, that's great news. It's bad news for you because you're dealing with anger at home, I know, but the good news is the kids are going to test out some things at home. If they're not testing out the anger, that either means that they're learning to navigate their interpersonal environment at home and they're going to see how anger is going to play out with you as parents, or it might mean that they are getting angry in other settings, but your child's able to manage it there because they know that it's inappropriate in those settings. So kids often have more freedoms. You know, if you're a good and responsive parent, I know as a child, even if I get angry and I let it out, I'm not going to be overly penalized for it. So it's a safe environment for me to express my anger. Whereas if I'm at school, I know it's not permitted there. I'm not going to show it there. So I have less concern about a child who's showing it at home. So now the other part of that question was, is anger a symptom of anxiety? It could be, but I'm going to say probably not. If I'm going to include anger as a symptom of anxiety, I want to see a whole host of other symptoms of anxiety. Most typically it's not, but it certainly could be. So I know that's not much of an answer, but without more information and you know, really talking about the specifics of your child, which we're not going to do here, it's hard to say. So hopefully that was helpful.
In this instance, it was anger with her siblings, it sounds like.
Oh, anger with siblings. I don't know. I'd need more information. I mean, certainly some of that is normal sibling rivalry. But again, if you're not seeing anger with friends outside of the home, I'm going to chalk that up to good news.
Kim says, amen to your daughter's quote. She couldn't agree with her more. So
I'll tell her you said that. She'll be thrilled.
Nancy says, I found it helpful to ask if my teen wants to vent or wants advice. Sometimes it's venting, and then I know my role is to listen before we start.
I love it. Can I use that in my next talk?
Nancy, permission to use for Ellen to use that in her next talk? I'll wait to hear.
I'll reference you, Nancy.
She said, sure.
Awesome. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's even better. That's terrific. You know, what do you need from me in this moment? Because I want to be here for you. Awesome.
Leslie asks, can anxiety be triggered by life-changing events, death of a grandparent, onset of COVID? Could it be triggered by a traumatic event?
Absolutely, without a doubt. No question.
And I don't know, I think I said this, but Nancy said, sure, you can reference her.
Thank you. Although I don't know Nancy's last name, so she'll just be referenced as Nancy.
Nancy, we have it in the chat. It's Patalano, Patalano.
All right, awesome. So this slide is just a reminder to come back. I mean, I can't see anyone. Actually, well, yeah, I can't see anyone. I don't know who's here. Hopefully that was helpful. But I would love for you to come back and continue to sort of build an ongoing conversation over the next few talks. And I just wanted to put up my email address in case anybody wanted to reach out to me.
I would also add that when you come back, bring a friend. Tell your friends, your colleagues how helpful this was if you thought it was, and also be on the lookout for future flyers like the one you may have seen on social media or shared by your child's school. Certainly, there will be one for every workshop with details in case you forget what you saw today. So keep those coming. Ellen, did you want to just toggle back quick to that slide so that if anyone wants to write down the dates, just to kind of save the dates, they can. But be on the lookout for information, and the link will be the same. So you can save this link, or you can just be on the lookout for it for next time. Nancy says, Mary says, very helpful. Nancy says, thank you. I have listened to a previous talk you had, another informative workshop. Thanks again.
Great. You know, I also want to say, although I don't know how you feel about this, Tabitha, but if you have questions, you could, or actually you could email me and then Tabitha could be left out of it. But if there are particular things that you want to hear about, you want to make sure that I cover in upcoming talks, I will tell you I have not planned them yet. So you can shoot me an email and say, hey, I'm coming on December 1st and I really want you to talk about this situation. Again, don't get personal, because I obviously can't attend to those kinds of issues. But if there is something you want to see or something you want to know more about and it fits with the theme of the talk, I would be more than happy to include it. My goal is to provide information and really practical, usable tips and information.
And I'm happy to field those questions as well. So if anyone forgets Ellen's email and you want to reach out to me at the school department, I'll be happy to forward them to Ellen as well. So I think that's an awesome idea, Ellen. Thank you for asking. Sure. Nancy says, could you put these in as a Facebook event? Then it could come up as a reminder and could be shared that way. Absolutely, Nancy. Good idea. I will try to do that for the next one. Can you put the slide up with your email again, please?
Well, I also want to say thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope it was worth your time. Yeah, I'm also, you can shoot me feedback. I'm always looking to sort of improve my game. I am the first one to say, oh, I probably could have done something better. I love to receive feedback. And so if you have any, feel free to shoot it to me. And I can learn from it as I go through the remaining 3 talks.
Great. Thank you so much for coming. And Ellen, thank you for spending your time with us tonight. I always find every one of your talks super helpful and informative. So I appreciate you and I appreciate your time. And I look forward to our next session in December.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.